Everyone said her cabin was built wrong, because it didn't touch the ground. It stood above it, like it didn't trust the land. And when winter came, they found out why. They noticed it before they understood it. Not the structure. The distance. 2 feet of air between wood and soil. Enough to make it look unfinished, wrong, unanchored, unsafe. Cabins were meant to sit on land, solid, direct. Held by what they stood on, not separated from it. But Eliza Morin had lifted hers. Not high, just enough. Enough to break contact. Enough to change the relationship. Caleb Dunn was the first to stop. He had built 3 cabins in his life, and buried one that failed beneath him. He circled hers slowly. Boot pressing into the ground, testing what he already trusted. Too high, he said. Eliza stood near the doorway, did not argue. Not high, she said. Separate. He frowned. That space will pull heat out. Yes, you'll burn more wood. Yes. He waited, expecting correction, explanation. It didn't come. Then why build it like this? He asked. Eliza turned slightly, not toward the sky, toward the ground, because that was where the problem lived. You're looking at it wrong, she said. You think the land stays still. He followed her gaze. Saw nothing unusual. Dry surface, firm footing, what it had always been. It does, he said. Eliza shook her head once. No, she stepped off the porch, walked a few paces out, then knelt, pressed her hand into the soil. Held it there, feeling something he could not see. In spring, she said, this moves. Caleb exhaled quietly. He knew water, knew rivers, but ground was supposed to be constant. It's too far from the river, he said. It doesn't need the river, she replied. It only needs time. That was the part most people missed. Not the water, the delay, months of stillness, followed by movement, slow, quiet, unavoidable. She had seen it once already. The first thaw, when snow softened, and the ground stopped holding. Water didn't rise visibly, it seeped. Lifted the soil from within. Turned firmness into something uncertain. Wood resting on it changed. Not suddenly. Gradually. Moisture climbed into it. Stayed. Waited. And wet wood does not behave the same. It pulls heat faster. Loses structure sooner. Fails quietly. She had watched it happen. Not to her own cabin. To the one they planned before. Pavel had seen it too. Had begun adjusting the design. But he hadn't lived long enough to build it. A falling tree in early summer ended that. Left her alone, with what he had noticed, and what the land had already shown her. So she changed it. Not everything. Just one thing that mattered. She lifted the structure, separated it, from what could not be controlled. Caleb looked back at the posts. Cedar, set deep, braced with stone. Not temporary. Not careless. Deliberate. That was what unsettled him. Because wrong is easier to dismiss. Deliberate requires thought. You're trading heat for something else, he said. Yes. For what? Eliza met his eyes. Steady. For a floor that stays. He said nothing. Because that answer was heavier than the others. Heat could be replaced. Wood could be cut. A structure that failed beneath you could not be fixed in winter. He nodded once. Not agreement, recognition. Then he mounted his horse and rode on. Others came, looked, judged, said the same things. Too exposed, too inefficient, too different. Because what they saw did not match what they knew. And what they knew had kept them alive. So they trusted it. Eliza did not argue. She worked. Because understanding does not build anything. She reinforced every post, spread the load through stone, ensured nothing shifted. She sealed the floor tighter than most. Every gap mattered now. Because air would move beneath it. She added skirting. Not walls, barriers. Placed to break wind. Not stop it. Slow it. Because still air traps moisture. Moving air removes it. Balance, not extremes. That was the structure. By late October, it complete. Raised, separated, controlled. From a distance, it still looked wrong. Too high, too exposed, too different. But winter does not care how something looks, only how it performs. And the decision had already been made, long before the cold arrived. Because the real problem had not reached them yet. She had not planned to build it that way. Not at first. Not before the thaw. The ground had looked the same through winter. Hard. Reliable. Holding everything placed on it. Cabins. Steps. Weight without question. But spring changed that. Not suddenly. Not in a way you could point to. It softened from below. Quietly. Almost politely. The snow melted first at the edges. Then along the low ground. Then beneath everything. Water moved where it could not be seen. Between layers. Through roots. Through the soil itself. Turning firmness into something else. She had stepped outside one morning. Early. Before the sun rose fully. And felt it. Not under her boots. Under the stillness. A shift. Subtle. But wrong. Later that day, the first board in their old cabin changed. Just slightly. A soft edge where there had been none. Moisture rising. Not pooling. Climbing. Pavel had noticed it too. Knelt beside the wall. Pressed his hand into the floorboards. Not the rain, he had said. Below. That was the moment. Not when the ground failed. When they understood it would. They had planned to rebuild that summer. Stronger. Better sealed. But the design had already begun to change. Not upward. Away. Then Pavel was gone. And the decision became hers alone. She returned to the site in early summer. Stood where the old structure had been. Nothing left but outline and memory. The ground had dried again. Firm. Convincing. But she no longer trusted it. Because she had seen what it became. So she started with the posts. Not the floor. Not the walls. The separation. Cedar trunks cut and shaped. Driven deep. Past the layer that changed. Into something stable. Something that did not move with water. Or time. Each post set by hand. Measured. Tested. She drove them deeper than needed. Not for weight, for certainty. Because if the base failed, everything failed. Stone came next. Not as foundation, as anchor. She packed it around each post, locked it in place, prevented shift. Wood alone moves. Stone resists. Together, they hold. They hold. The frame rose above that. Simple. Efficient. Floor beams laid across the posts. Joined tight. No flex, no give. Because movement creates openings. And openings invite loss. She sealed the floor carefully. Board against board, no gaps left unconsidered. Not for insulation, for control. Air would move beneath it, that was intentional. But not through it, that was the difference. Between exposure and design. Then came the skirting, not walls, screens. Rough boards placed around the base, set with spacing, measured gaps. Enough to slow the wind, not enough to trap air. Because trapped air holds moisture. And moisture feeds cold. She adjusted it more than once, closed some gaps, opened others. Watched how the wind moved through it. Listened to the sound, felt the change beneath the floor. Because what mattered was not blocking the air. It was controlling it. The roof came last, standard, nothing unusual. Because the problem was never above. It was always below. Hidden, ignored. When Caleb returned in late summer, the structure was already complete. Raised, separated, quietly different. He walked beneath it, looked up at the floor, then back at her. "You've built a draft under your own house," he said. Eliza nodded. "Yes." "That'll pull heat out all winter." "Yes." He studied her for a moment, trying to find the mistake, the flaw. "You're making it harder," he said. "No," she answered. "I'm changing where it fails." That was the part no one saw yet. Not the structure, the shift. Cabins on the ground fail from below, quietly, hidden, too late to fix. Hers would fail in the open, in the air, where it could be seen, where it could be managed. Caleb stepped back, looked at the space again, at the gap between wood and soil, then at the ground beneath it. Still firm, still convincing. He shook his head once. "Ground doesn't move that much," he said. Eliza didn't respond, because by the time it did, it would already be too late. She turned back to her work, adjusting the skirting, checking the airflow. Because the design was finished. But the system was still being tested. The cold arrived slowly that year. Not as a storm, not as a warning, as a shift. Mornings came earlier, frost held longer, shadows stayed colder. The ground still looked the same, firm, unchanged. That was what made it dangerous. Because nothing about it suggested what it would become. Eliza noticed the difference first, in the air beneath the floor. Not above, below. She knelt one morning, pressed her hand into the space beneath the cabin, felt the movement, cold air passing through, steady, controlled. Not trapped, not building, flowing. That was the intention, not to stop the cold, but to keep it from staying. Inside the cabin, the floor held differently, not warm, but dry. And dry changes everything. Moisture pulls heat faster, carries it away. Feeds the cold. Without it, loss slows, just enough. She tested it the first night. The temperature dropped hard, no fire, just the space, the air inside cooled. Of course it did, nothing stops that. But the floor stayed stable, did not soften, did not pull. That was the difference. Subtle, but measurable. Across the ridge, others had already begun preparing. More wood, more insulation, sealing gaps, closing space, holding heat. The same way they always had. The same way that worked, until it didn't. Caleb visited again in early December. Snow already settled in thin layers, cold holding steady. He stepped inside without speaking, stood still. Feeling it. Colder than mine, he said. Eliza nodded, yes. He waited, but again, no correction came. Because she wasn't trying to be warmer, she was trying to be consistent. That was harder to see, harder to trust. But it mattered more. He crouched, pressed his hand to the floor. Then pulled it back. Dry, he said. Yes. He looked at her. Mine isn't. That was the beginning, not failure, difference. By mid-December, the pattern was clear. Her cabin did not feel better, it felt stable. No sudden drops, no dampness creeping upward. No hidden cold. Everything that changed, changed slowly, predictably. That was what allowed her to adjust. To manage. To stay ahead. She burned less wood than expected. Not because she needed less heat, because she lost less of it. And loss was always the real cost. The others didn't see it yet. Not fully. Because their cabins still held. Still functioned. Still survived. For now. The ground beneath them remained frozen. Locked. Solid. But Eliza had seen what came after that. Not the freeze. The release. She stepped outside one evening. Late. The air sharp and thin. Looked down at the soil beneath her cabin. White with frost. Still. Unmoving. Just as it had been before. Before it changed. Before it softened. Before it failed. She stood there a moment longer. Not watching the present. Remembering the future. Because winter was not the hardest part. It was what came after. When the ground woke up. And nothing held the same way. Inside her cabin. Everything remained separate. Above it. Away from it. That was the design. Not to survive the cold. To survive what the cold created. And that part had not reached them yet. The change did not come with warmth. It came with softness. Barely visible, easy to ignore. The snow began to sink. Not melt, settle. Edges collapsing first, then patches of ground beneath it, darkening, wet. Without rain. That was the first sign, not water falling, water rising. From below, from everything the winter had held down. Eliza stepped off her porch that morning, boot pressing into the surface. It held, then gave, slightly. Enough. She didn't test it again, she already knew, the ground had begun to move. Across the ridge, others noticed it differently, a soft floorboard, a damp corner, a smell that didn't belong. Not strong, but present. Moisture finding its way upward. Through wood, through structure. Not flooding, not yet. But changing everything it touched. Caleb came first, faster this time, not curious, concerned. He stepped inside her cabin, looked down immediately, then back at her. "It's dry," he said. "Yes." He exhaled, short, tight. "Mine isn't." She didn't ask how bad, he didn't explain, they both understood what came next. The thaw accelerated, sun reaching deeper, days holding longer. The ground stopped pretending. Softening fully, losing shape, water moved everywhere now, not visible, but undeniable. Cabins began to shift. Not collapse, adjust. Boards lifting slightly, edges warping, joints loosening. Wood taking in what it couldn't release, holding moisture. Holding cold. That was the part no one planned for. Not the temperature, the transfer. Wet ground feeds wet wood feeds cold, and cold moves faster through it. One cabin developed a soft floor near the stove. Another began to tilt along the back wall. Subtle, but enough to change how weight sat, how heat moved. How safety held. Eliza's cabin did not change, not because it was stronger, because it was separate. Air still moved beneath it, carrying moisture away, breaking the connection. The ground could shift, water could rise. None of it reached her floor, that was the difference.
Not resistance. Distance. More came, not asking now. Watching. Looking beneath her cabin. At the space they had dismissed. At the air they had avoided. Warren Holt arrived in the second week. A builder. A man who trusted what he could measure. He crouched beneath her structure. Studied the posts. The stone. The airflow. Said nothing at first. Then, "You planned for this." Eliza shook her head. "No." He looked up at her. Waiting. Expecting more. "I remembered it," she said. That was the difference. Planning assumes stability. Memory understands change. He stood slowly. Looked back toward the ridge. Where cabins sat lower. Closer. Connected. "They won't hold," he said. Eliza didn't answer. Because holding was already ending. One floor gave way near the back edge. Not a collapse. A drop. Enough to twist the frame. Enough to break alignment. Enough to change everything. They tried to fix it. Added supports. Packed soil beneath. But soil was the problem. Not the solution. The more they pressed it, the more it shifted. The more it held water. The faster it failed. Eliza stood at the edge of her porch one evening, watching it happen. Not with satisfaction. With recognition. Because this was what she had built away from. The ground did not break suddenly. It changed. Until nothing resting on it remained the same. And by the time you noticed, you were already inside the failure. Behind her, the floor stayed level. Dry. Unmoved. Below it, the air continued to flow, carrying away what the ground released, preventing what it fed. She placed her hand on the porch rail, felt the stability, the difference, not in strength, in separation, because winter had not been the test. This was the part no one prepares for, and the part she had already stepped above.
By the time the ground settled again, nothing looked the same. Not the cabins, not the land, not the way they spoke about either. Some structures held, most did not. Not in the way they were meant to. Floors remained uneven, walls no longer square, joints that would never tighten the same again. They could be repaired. Of course they could. Wood can always be replaced. But what had changed was trust. The ground had shown itself. Not unreliable, just not permanent. That was enough. Enough to shift how they saw everything built on it. Eliza's cabin remained where it had always been. Unchanged. Level. Dry. Separate. The space beneath it. Still open. Still moving. Nothing trapped. Nothing feeding what it should not. Nothing rising where it could not be stopped. Caleb returned one last time that season. Slower now. Not from age. From reconsideration. He stood beneath her cabin again. Looked up at the beams. At the space. Then back at her. "You were right," he said. Eliza didn't answer. Not out of pride. Out of accuracy. "I didn't see it," he added. "None of us did." She stepped down from the porch. Stopped beside him. Looked at the ground. "You saw what it looked like," she said. "Not what it becomes." He nodded slowly. Because that was harder. Easier to build for what is. Harder to build for what changes. Hardest of all, to build for what you cannot see yet. Warren Holt came later that week. With measurements. With questions. Not asking if it worked. Asking how. Eliza showed him little. Not because she refused. Because it wasn't something you could hand over. "Posts first," she said. Not the floor. "Air beneath," she added. Not sealed. "And the ground?" he asked. She looked at it once more. Then back at him. Leave it alone. That was the part most people struggled with. Not building more. Building less. Letting something remain separate. Even when instinct said to close the gap. By the next season, new cabins began to rise differently. Not all. But enough. Raised slightly. Not as high as hers. But not touching fully. Spaces left beneath them. Intentional. Considered. The ridge changed slowly. Not in appearance. In understanding. They still cut wood, still built walls, still fought the cold. But now, they also watched the ground. Waited for what it would do next. Eliza remained where she had built. Same cabin. Same distance from the earth. One evening, as spring returned again, she stood at the edge of her porch. Looked down. The ground was firm again. Dry. Convincing. Exactly as it had been before. Exactly as it would always appear. Before it changed. She stepped down, pressed her boot into it once, felt the resistance. Then stepped back up. Without testing it again. Because she no longer needed proof. She had already seen the outcome. Some people try to survive by building stronger, adding more, holding tighter. Others do something different. They step away from what fails. Not far, not completely. Just enough. Eliza Moran had done that. 2 feet above the ground. One decision away from what everyone else trusted. And because she did, when the land changed, it no longer decided what happened to her. It only revealed who had understood it.